This is theBreaker.news podcast for the week of May 19th, 2024. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 343. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And on the Big Deal feature, should athletes born male be allowed to play sports against women? It's a question that Premier David Eby's NDP government refused to debate during the British Columbia Legislature's spring session, which ended May 16th. The NDP called it transphobic, but the Conservative Party called it necessary to keep sports safe and fair. My guests this week are Hannah Driedger, an aide to Conservative leader John Rustad, and Linda Blade, former Athletics Alberta president, coach, and author. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre came to East Vancouver on May 16th to announce another plank in his platform. He proposes a summertime gas tax holiday for drivers. Specifically, Poilievre says the Trudeau Liberals should suspend the carbon tax, excise tax, and GST on gas and diesel between Victoria Day and Labor Day. Poilievre estimated average Canadian families would save $870. How could the government pay for it? He suggested the Trudeau Liberals could cut back on the billions of dollars they spend every year on consultants. $21 billion a year for what the government calls professional and special services. Poilievre spoke to reporters between the Esso gas pumps and 7-Eleven convenience store at Grandview and Rupert. Only 4 of us were allowed to ask a single question each, so I packed 2 into 1.
Next question.
Bob Mackin, theBreaker.news. You have made it your feelings clear about lobbyists and how you would approach lobbyists if you become Prime Minister. Will you back that up with laws, with amendments to laws to stop the conflicts of interest that are happening, the unethical lobbying that happens, the people that are basically selling access to the politicians? Will you back that up with laws? And also wanted to find out what your feelings are about the federal spending so far on the FIFA World Cup, about $220 million spread between Vancouver and Toronto, which is just a drop in the bucket. There's going to be a lot more because the government has not announced what they're spending on security.
So on your first point, yes, we already did. It was the Conservative, the government of Stephen Harper that brought in the Accountability Act, which forced lobbyists to register their interactions with politicians. So every time a lobbyist interacts with a politician or top bureaucrat, they have to register it. As a result of a law that I helped usher through the House of Commons in 2006 as the parliamentary secretary to the Treasury Board president. And I do think we need even stronger and clearer laws to stop the excess influence of corporate lobbyists and other insiders. Justin Trudeau has found a number of loopholes in the Accountability Act. We need to close those loopholes to reduce the influence of lobbyists, of insiders, and give Canadians back control of their government. As for spending on these sporting events, we need to protect taxpayers. Every time the Trudeau government spends on anything, they go over budget, massively over budget. And then nobody's held accountable. The taxpayers pick up the tab. So I'm very hesitant to spend taxpayers' money on anything other than the core services of roads, bridges, police, military, border security, and a safety net for those who can't provide for themselves. That's common sense. Let's bring it home.
This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. Should athletes who are born male be allowed to compete in women's sports against females? What is more important in sport, inclusivity or safety and a level playing field? In 2023, World Athletics, the track and field governing body, banned male-to-female transgender athletes who have been through male puberty. On April 30th, in the British Columbia Legislature, John Rustad, the leader of the Conservative Party of BC, tabled the private member's bill called the Fairness in Women's and Girls' Sports Bill. The bill proposed requiring publicly funded sports, teams, events, and tournaments to be classified by sex and limit participants of the biological sex that corresponds to the sex classification. Private members' bills almost never get passed in BC's whipped legislature. In this case, the NDP government under Premier David Eby took it one step further. The NDP used its majority to block the bill from the order paper so that it could not be debated in the legislature this session. Kelly Patton, the Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity, took to social media and called it a, quote, horrific bill targeting trans women and girls. It's the latest in a pattern of Rustad's party targeting queer kids, end quote. Rustad said in the legislature that the bill was written by women and girls for women and girls. The legislature's spring session ended May 16th and won't reconvene until sometime after the October 19th provincial election. Now, joining me on this podcast are Hannah Driedger, the Research and Communications Officer for John Rustad, the leader of the Conservative caucus in the BC legislature, and Linda Blade, the former president of Athletics Alberta, former heptathlete, a high-performance coach, and holder of a PhD in kinesiology from Simon Fraser University. And Linda Blade is also the co-author with Barbara Kay of Unsporting, How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. Now, Hannah, you helped draft this bill. What was in it?
Thanks, Bob, not only for inviting us on to have this important conversation, but for, right off the bat, the great question. So the bill in and of itself essentially outlines the following. In the province of British Columbia, there is clearly a need for somebody to step in and say, female categories need to be established and they need to be separate from a male category. Along with that, there is a clear need for, to be put in writing, the establishment and the need for a co-ed category. For those who, for every athlete between women and girls like myself who often do like to train with stronger individuals like males and do find great training partners in males. And really enjoy the thrill and the opportunity and the experience of competing with males, but not at the expense of the female category. So the bill in and of itself is quite simple. It puts those very definitions and that context into writing. And beyond that, it does also give any athlete or organization, if, for example, they were to ask for an investigation or for the record to be looked at if a male participated in a female category and earned a quote unquote a title or record in the female category, that they would have the right to ask for that to be struck from the record. And by doing so, the bill would establish legal protection for them to be able to do that and to ask for that process without being demonized for doing so. So that was very important for us to have that anti-retaliatory clause in the bill, because unfortunately what we've seen in other jurisdictions across North America, when brave women and girls step up and to try and point out this travesty that is going on in female sports categories. So that was very important for us to have in the bill as well.
Anna, which sports do you train and compete in?
From a young age, I have played everything from soccer to volleyball, and now in my adult years, my favorite sports of choice are judo. I love to box. And same with wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Those are my passions currently.
An important moment in sports where women's sports have become big business with WNBA and with professional soccer. We're seeing the Olympics coming up in Paris, where the International Olympic Committee was quite proud that this will be a gender equal Olympics, that there will be as many female athletes as male athletes. So while that is happening, this debate.
Certainly. And another thing that I do think it's important to stress here is that, I run into a lot of people, athletes, individuals, everybody in between, who maybe doesn't recall that there is precedent here in our province as well as, again, as both you and I mentioned, across jurisdictions in North America. So I would remind everybody of the individual named Michelle Dumaresque, who is a biological male and professional downhill mountain bike competitor from British Columbia, who in May of 2001 entered the Bear Mountain race in in Mission here in BC, entered the novice female class and won. And in fact, Dumoresque's time was 2.5 seconds faster than the winner of the female professional category, who of course was a female. And despite public outcry from both the athletes and Dumoresque's fellow female competitors and the public itself, this person was permitted and, in fact, I would say emboldened to continue on for years in that sports category, taking opportunities away from women and smashing records for the very obvious reason that this person is a biological male. And as you've just mentioned, I mean, that is a biological fact. We have millions of years of precedent to back that up if people perhaps don't want to take our word for it. But I'm afraid as well what we've seen here, and as I've studied and I've learned from esteemed individuals like Professor Richard Dawkins, is that what we have seen play out, certainly here in British Columbia, but across the West, is a conflation of the terms sex and gender. Now, gender is the behavioral expression of biological sex, of which there are two. And in recent years, and in certainly the past decade or so, what we have seen happen is there has been a conflation of the two words, and it's become a genteel euphemism. And unfortunately, what we've also seen play out is this word and the context and everything that it brings with it has been allowed to undermine, and now, especially in recent cases, undermine the word sex itself and the concept and the reality that comes with that. And what we have seen is that it comes at great harm and great cost to women and girls. So we felt, and I'm proud to work for John Rustad, a man who has integrity, and felt it was important to step in and say, allowing this to happen, allowing biological males to self-identify their way into female sports categories is not valor, it's vandalism. And it's time for someone to step in and say just that. And that is what we did with the scope and spirit of this legislation. And I'm proud of not just that, but that it will stand for itself and in the record for not just politicians to see, but the public themselves to see and to read. And I'm very proud of that.
And Linda Blade, you were there in the public gallery in the legislative chamber as John Rustad spoke and tabled the bill, and then you saw what happened with the extraordinary vote by the NDP caucus to prevent the bill from reaching the next stage. What was your feeling as this was unfolding? Was it a bit of a roller coaster?
Well, I can't say it was unexpected, but it was a huge betrayal of women and girls in BC and across Canada. The fact that a majority party would physically stand and say, no, we don't care about fairness for women and girls in sport is really, it was astonishing and basically disheartening, because you would think that they would want to let the bill go through for closer inspection, second reading, all of that. Just something where they could review what is going on, what would entice somebody to table a bill such as this, even if they'd never heard of the growing problem of males in female competition. You would think they would want to at least give women and girls a chance with a bill like this. And I have to just hand it to Hannah and John Rustad and that whole group for having the guts to put this on the table, because it's high time in Canada.
The NDP tried to frame this bill as being transphobic and against human rights laws. What is your answer to the NDP and its allegation that this is transphobic?
It's pro-women. The word trans doesn't even show up in the document. Apparently, they're the ones conflating trans with pro-women, as if nobody's allowed to be pro-biological sex anymore. And the truth is, sex is in the charter. sex hasn't gone away. When gender identity and gender expression were added to the human rights law, I didn't see biological sex disappear as a characteristic against which we cannot discriminate. So the fact that they would conflate it like that and then disparage those of us who are supporting women and girls and trying to make us look like somehow we're some sort of back in the cave days, wanting to have, respect on the basis of sex is crazy. And I think the public will see right through it. Frankly, they can disparage us all they want, but what we're asking for is really logical. And if you read the bill, it's very nicely written, simply put, it's pro-women, and it has nothing to do with any ideology. We compete with our bodies, not with our ideologies. And the last time I checked, we never picked athletes for any sport based on their religion, their ideology, their politics. The beauty of sport was that you could always put those things aside and compete with your bodies. And fundamentally, bodies are still male and female.
Hannah, Premier David Eby, the leader of the NDP, has accused the Conservatives under John Rustad of trying to bring U.S.-style culture war politics into the legislature, and this is one of the cases that he points to. What is your reaction to that?
You know what, Bob? I'm actually really glad that you asked me that. Now, here's another thing I'm really proud to tell you. In my family, I am proud to not only be a part of a family of strong Canadians and Brits, but Americans. And I will tell you that it makes me so proud that not only my husband, but my father-in-law are Americans. And I've had about enough of politicians demonizing our family and our friends over in the United States. We are North Americans at the end of the day. We're in this together, and I will not sit by and allow somebody to demonize our fellow North Americans. And I would encourage him, and I hope that he hears me say this. They are our friends, they are our family, and they are people who live their lives with honor and dignity, and who make sacrifices for people like us so we can enjoy the lives that we live in this beautiful province that we enjoy. And I would remind him of that. And now, what I will say about the Premier accusing us of importing American-style politics into this province is, I encourage and I will allow the public to play judge, jury, and executioner likely in this upcoming provincial election in the fall for themselves. We will let the public decide who it is who is importing divisive ideology into this province and creating a wedge not only here on our very doorstep and in our provincial legislature, but across the West. And I hope people hear that, and I hope they remember that come October 19th.
So we've seen other places in the world, the United States grappling with it, the Brits grappling with it, but here in British Columbia, this aversion to even talking about it in the legislature. Well, why do you think that is?
Well, I can't speak for why they would not want to talk about it unless they're just scared to death to face the truth. But can I just backtrack just a little and say I agree about the NC2A. I am a product of that system. I was so grateful that when I graduated from British Columbia as a high school athlete, I had a full scholarship down in the States, graduated from University of Maryland. And you know what I did with that thing? That NCAA scholarship launched my entire career as a high performance coach. When I went overseas, I literally got a job with World Athletics, going into Muslim countries, teaching Muslim women how to coach girls. They needed a female to go into those countries to help the women develop their own girls in sport. And I was that person in the late 90s who did this in Iran, Tehran, and Bahrain, all the way across. And so it set me up, and now I came back to Alberta, became eventually president of Athletics Alberta, and which is the Track and Field Association. And then we were lobbying very hard because it became apparent in about 2018 that the national governing bodies of sport in Canada were asking us to allow a male athlete to come into women's sport, can identify as a female one day, or just play in the men's section the next day without any mitigation, without any gatekeeping. And finally, I was so glad, so grateful that World Athletics last year made the ruling that it was unethical and prohibited for a male athlete to compete against female athletes at the elite level. But then when that happened, the national governing body then decided, well, we can't change the international section. So now we're just going to say this has to happen at the provincial level with the children on the ground. And at the time, I was still president of Athletics Alberta, and I said, not on my watch. In Athletics Alberta, we're going to say if you're born male, you compete male. That's the most inclusive thing you can do, because the minute you allow a male athlete into female sport, then you're excluding women and girls. And by the way, I've had many letters since I've spoken out and wrote the book. I've had letters from BC parents of 9-year-olds and small children saying, can you help us somehow? Can you help me make sense of the fact that a little boy was allowed to play against my daughter? And, you know, it's happening at ground level. We're not allowed to talk about it. It's a problem. So the fact that the bill would be put on the table at a provincial legislature is so important, Bob, because it means that we can fix things at ground level, and then some things are being fixed at the international level, and eventually everything aligns between, because I think the national governing bodies are just so indoctrinated now with this ideology that we're not even allowed to change anything at the national level. So the power is on the ground, in the provinces, on the community playing fields. If we can fix that, I think it's pretty much resolved, actually, because, you know, top female athletes come from somewhere. Where do they come from? They come from communities and provincial sports experiences, and eventually make it to the top. And if they're allowed to compete fairly at the provincial community levels, schools, they will thrive. And that's what we're seeking.
Perhaps I could maybe just tie up that thought, that beautiful thought here, also by saying